Have you ever wondered what it truly means to be trapped? Not just physically confined, but spiritually imprisoned, caught between the world of the living and something far more sinister. Let me tell you about the Crowhurst family of Willow Creek, Alabama, and perhaps you'll understand why some doors should never be opened, and why some should never be locked. It was the autumn of 1844 when I first heard about the Crowhurst estate. I was working as a traveling physician then, making my rounds through the cotton plantations that dotted the Alabama countryside like festering wounds on the earth. The locals in Montgomery had warned me about taking the old road through Willow Creek, said the town had been dying for years, bleeding families like a severed artery. But I was young, arrogant, and convinced that superstition was the enemy of progress. The first thing you need to understand about Willow Creek is that it wasn't just dying, it was rotting from the inside out. The cotton blight of '42 had destroyed most of the crops, and with them went the prosperity that had once made the town flourish. By the time I arrived that October evening, with storm clouds gathering like carrion birds overhead, only a handful of families remained. The Crowhursts were the wealthiest among them. Their mansion stood at the end of Magnolia Lane, a massive Greek revival structure that seemed to loom over the surrounding landscape like a tombstone. White columns stretched 3 stories high, but the paint was peeling, revealing the gray wood beneath like exposed bone. The windows, God, those windows. They were all dark except for one on the 3rd floor, where a pale light flickered like a dying heart. I had been summoned by a letter from Jeremiah Crowhurst himself, the patriarch of the family. His handwriting had been erratic, almost fevered, begging me to come immediately. His wife, Constance, had fallen ill with what he described as a malady of the mind and spirit. The local doctor had fled town weeks ago, leaving them desperate for medical attention. As my carriage pulled up to the entrance, I noticed something peculiar. Every door I could see, the main entrance, the servants' doors, even the cellar access, had locks on the outside. Brand new locks, their brass still gleaming despite the humid southern air. But it wasn't just that they were locked from the outside. Each lock had been installed backwards, as if the house itself had been transformed into a prison designed to keep something in. The front door opened before I could knock. Jeremiah Crowhurst stood there, and I'll never forget my first impression of him. He had once been a handsome man. You could see it in the strong jawline and the noble bearing, but something had eaten away at him from within. His eyes were bloodshot, darting constantly to the shadows behind me, as if expecting something to materialize from the gathering darkness. His clothes, though expensive, hung loose on his frame, and his hands wouldn't stop shaking. "Dr. Ashford," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank God you've come. Please come in quickly." He practically pulled me across the threshold, then immediately turned to secure the door behind me. Not just one lock, but 3. A deadbolt, a chain, and a heavy wooden bar that he struggled to lift into place. The interior of the house was a study in contradictions. Expensive furniture covered in dust sheets, like ghosts frozen in time. Portraits on the walls with the faces scratched out. Not torn or cut, but scratched as if by fingernails, leaving only the eyes intact. Those painted eyes seemed to follow me as Jeremiah led me through the hallways, past door after door, each one sealed from the outside with those backwards locks. "Mr. Crowhurst," I began, trying to maintain my professional composure despite the chill running down my spine. "These locks, for our protection," he interrupted, his laugh bitter and hollow. "You'll understand soon enough. First, you must see Constance. She's getting worse." We climbed the grand staircase, and with each step, I became aware of a sound, a rhythmic scratching, like fingernails on wood, coming from somewhere deep within the house. Jeremiah must have noticed my reaction because he quickened his pace, muttering something under his breath that sounded like a prayer. The 3rd-floor hallway was darker than the rest of the house, lit only by a few dying candles that cast dancing shadows on the walls. The scratching sound was louder here, and now I could hear something else. A low humming, a lullaby perhaps, but sung in a voice that didn't sound entirely human. Jeremiah stopped at a door different from all the others. This one had no outside lock. Instead, There were scratches around the doorframe, deep gouges in the wood as if something had tried to claw its way out. Or in. "She's in here," he whispered, his hand trembling on the doorknob. "But doctor, before we enter, I must warn you. Whatever you see, whatever she says or does, you must not unlock any of the other doors in this house. Promise me." I should have left then. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, to return to my carriage and never look back. But I was a man of science, committed to my oath to help those in need. So I nodded, and Jeremiah Crowhurst opened the door to show me his wife. What I saw in that room would begin my descent into a nightmare that still haunts me 40 years later. Because Constance Crowhurst wasn't just ill. She was changed. And the change had already begun to spread to the rest of the family. The room reeked of lavender and decay, a sickly sweet combination that immediately made my stomach turn. Heavy curtains blocked out the evening light, and dozens of candles had been placed around the room, their wax pooling on expensive furniture like pale blood. But it was the woman in the bed that drew my attention and filled me with a dread I had never before experienced in my medical career. Constance Crowhurst had once been beautiful. The portraits I'd glimpsed downstairs confirmed that. But the creature lying in that four-poster bed bore little resemblance to the woman in those paintings. Her skin had taken on a grayish pallor, like old parchment, and it seemed to shift and move independent of her body, as if something was crawling beneath it. Her hair, once golden, had turned white as bone and grew in strange patterns, some patches completely gone while others grew wild and tangled. But it was her eyes that truly disturbed me. They were completely black. Not just the pupils, but the entire eye, as if they had been filled with ink. Yet somehow I could tell she was looking directly at me. "Another doctor," she said, and her voice was like grinding glass. "How delightful. Tell me, doctor, do you know what it's like to be in two places at once?" Before I could respond, Jeremiah stepped between us. "She's been like this for 3 weeks," he said quickly. "It started with nightmares, terrible nightmares about the house, about us, about things that hadn't happened yet. Then she began sleepwalking, but not normally." "What do you mean?" I asked, setting down my medical bag while keeping my eyes on Constance, who had begun to hum that disturbing lullaby again. "She would be in two places," Jeremiah whispered. "I would see her in bed, sleeping, but the children would swear they saw her in their rooms, standing over their beds. Sometimes I would see her myself in the hallway, even though I had just left her locked in here." I wanted to dismiss this as hysteria, shared delusion brought on by stress and isolation. But as Constance continued to hum, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Her shadow on the wall didn't match her position in the bed. While she lay still, her shadow stood upright, swaying slightly as if dancing to her tuneless song. "The children," I managed to say, my mouth dry. "Where are they?" Jeremiah's face crumbled. "Locked in their rooms. For their safety. They've begun to change as well. First Margaret, our eldest, then the twins. Only our youngest, Samuel, seems unaffected, but I fear it's only a matter of time." I approached Constance carefully, pulling out my stethoscope. The moment I touched her skin, I jerked back. It was ice cold, but more than that, it felt wrong, as if the texture wasn't quite human anymore. She laughed at my reaction, a sound like breaking bells. "The good doctor is afraid," she crooned. "He should be. We're all afraid here. All except those who've already accepted what's coming." "What's coming?" I asked despite myself, her black eyes fixed on mine. "The opening. The great opening. We've been preparing for so long, you see. Generation after generation locked away, keeping it closed. But we're tired now. So very tired of holding the door." Jeremiah grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in painfully. "She's delirious. The fever has affected her mind." But there was no fever. Her temperature was well below normal, and her pulse, I counted it 3 times to be sure. Her heart was beating exactly once every minute. Not enough to sustain life, yet here she was, talking and moving. "I need to examine the children," I said, trying to maintain some semblance of professional authority. If this is a contagious condition. No! Jeremiah's shout echoed through the room. They must stay locked in. It's the only way to contain it. Contain what? I demanded. That's when we heard it. A sound that still echoes in my nightmares. From somewhere below us came a massive crack, like wood splintering, followed by the sound of a door slowly creaking open. Jeremiah went pale as death itself. Margaret, he whispered. She's broken through. What followed was a sound I can only describe as footsteps, but wrong. Too many feet, or perhaps not feet at all, moving with an irregular rhythm through the house below. And with each step, that scratching sound grew louder. Constance sat up in bed with unnatural smoothness, her body moving as if pulled by invisible strings. She's learning, she said with what might have been pride. They're all learning. How to be in more than one place. How to open doors that should stay closed. How to lock them from the outside while still being within. I heard a child's laughter then, but it came from everywhere and nowhere at once. From the walls, the ceiling, from inside my own head. Jeremiah fell to his knees, sobbing. It was my grandfather, he choked out between sobs. He built this house on the old ground, the cursed ground. The natives warned him, told him about the thing that lived between spaces, the thing that could be in all places at once. He thought the locks would keep it out, but it was already inside. It's always been inside, waiting in our blood, passing from parent to child. The footsteps were climbing the stairs now, accompanied by a dragging sound. I moved toward the door, but Constance's hand shot out, grabbing my wrist with impossible strength. You can't leave now, doctor, she said, smiling with too many teeth. You're part of the family now. Everyone who enters becomes part of the family. That's why we lock the doors from the outside. Not to keep us in, but to keep us everywhere. The door to the room began to bulge inward, as if something massive was pressing against it from the hallway. But when it finally burst open, what stood there was just a little girl in a white nightgown. Margaret Crowhurst, 13 years old, with her mother's black eyes and her father's strong jaw. She looked at me and smiled, and I saw that she was standing in the doorway, but also still in her bed down the hall, and also outside in the garden, and also in the cellar, and also, my mind began to fracture, trying to comprehend what I was seeing. Multiple versions of the same child, all existing simultaneously, all looking at me with those ink-black eyes. Welcome to the family, doctor, all the Margarets said in unison. Now, shall we unlock the other doors? I've seen men die from cholera, watched children waste away from consumption, held the hands of women as they bled out in childbirth, but nothing in my medical training had prepared me for what I witnessed in the Crowhurst mansion that night. Reality itself seemed to be unraveling, like a tapestry being pulled apart thread by thread. Margaret stood in the doorway. No, she stood in multiple doorways, each version slightly different. One had blood on her nightgown. Another's hair was wet as if she'd been in the rain. A third was older, perhaps by years, with hollow cheeks and fingernails grown long and yellow. Yet they were all Margaret, all moving in perfect synchronization as they entered the room. Stop looking at them all, Jeremiah begged me, pressing his palms against his eyes. It makes it worse when you acknowledge them. That's how it spreads, through observation, through acceptance. But I couldn't look away. My medical mind needed to understand, to categorize this impossible affliction. As I watched, I began to notice something even more disturbing. The versions of Margaret weren't just copies, they were possibilities. One showed signs of smallpox scars that the real Margaret had never contracted. Another limped from an injury that had never occurred. They were all the Margarets that could have been, might have been, or would be. The twins, I managed to say, my voice barely working. You said the twins were affected too? As if summoned by my words, two boys appeared, or perhaps it would be more accurate to say they materialized, seeming to step out of the shadows themselves. Thomas and Timothy, identical even in their transformation. But where Margaret's multiplication seemed chaotic, the twins moved in perfect mirror symmetry. When one raised his right hand, the other raised his left. When one spoke, the other mouthed the words silently. We've been practicing, Thomas said. Or was it Timothy? Practicing being everywhere, the other continued. And nowhere, all at once. Their words bounced between them like a game, but their eyes, those horrible black eyes, never blinked, never looked away from me. Constance laughed from her bed, the sound reverberating from multiple throats as her own duplicates began to manifest. You see, Doctor? This is evolution. This is ascension. Why be trapped in one body, one space, one moment, when you can be infinite? I stumbled backward, my bag spilling its contents across the floor. Glass vials shattered, their contents mixing with the pooling candle wax. The smell of chemicals filled the room, and for a moment, just a moment, the multiplications flickered like flames in a wind. The chloroform? I whispered, remembering the bottle in my bag. They react to it. Jeremiah looked at me with desperate hope. You can stop this? But before I could answer, a new voice spoke from the corner of the room. A young boy's voice, clear and unnaturally calm. You can't stop what's already happened. Samuel Crowhurst stepped into the candlelight, and my heart sank. The youngest child, perhaps 8 years old, stood there perfectly singular, no duplicates, no multiplications. But his eyes weren't black. They were gone entirely, leaving only smooth skin where they should have been. Samuel volunteered, Constance explained, her multiple selves speaking in a horrible chorus, to be our anchor, to keep us from drifting too far into the spaces between. But the price? Oh, the price was his sight. Not just his eyes, Doctor, but his ability to see any singular truth. He sees everything now. All possibilities, all moments, all the locked doors and what lies behind them. The boy walked toward me with impossible confidence for someone without eyes. You're wondering how this happened, he said. You're thinking about the medical explanation, the scientific reasoning. But you're not asking the right question. What question should I be asking? My voice shook. Why did we lock ourselves in? The room fell silent except for that endless scratching sound, which I now realized was coming from inside the walls themselves. 3 months ago, Samuel continued, Father found something in the cellar, a door that had been bricked over by his grandfather. He thought it was just storage, maybe wine or preserved goods. But when he opened it, the boy's face contorted in what might have been fear or ecstasy. It wasn't a room. It was a passage to the spaces between spaces, where things exist that shouldn't, where time doesn't flow forward but spreads out like spilled ink. Jeremiah was weeping openly now. I didn't know. God help me, I didn't know. I thought it was just an old cellar. But when I broke through, something came out. Not a creature exactly, but an influence, a possibility. It offered us a gift, Margaret's voices chimed in, to be unlimited, to exist beyond the constraints of singular flesh. But gifts have prices, the twins added in their eerie tandem. And the price, Constance concluded, was to become the door ourselves, to be the threshold between this world and the spaces between. That's why we lock the doors from the outside. We're not trying to keep ourselves in. We're trying to keep ourselves from spreading out into the world. Each locked door is a boundary, a limit on how far we can multiply. I looked around the room, counting the versions of each family member. Margaret had 7 iterations visible. The twins each had 4. Constance had 12. But they were increasing, slowly but steadily, like a disease multiplying in a petri dish. How long? I asked. How long before you can't contain it? Samuel tilted his eyeless face toward me. Tonight, when the moon is dark, when the boundaries are thinnest, we won't be able to hold ourselves together anymore. We'll spread out into Willow Creek, then Alabama, then everywhere. Everyone we touch will begin to multiply, to exist in all states at once. The human race will cease to be singular beings and become something else. Unless, Constance said, and all her versions smiled simultaneously, we complete the ritual. What ritual? The one that requires a willing sacrifice. Someone who hasn't been infected yet. Someone who can choose to take our place as the door, to hold the passage closed with their singular existence. They were all looking at me now, Every version of every family member, dozens of black eyes fixed on my face. "You have until midnight to decide, Doctor," Jeremiah said, and for the first time since I'd arrived, he seemed almost peaceful. "Either you take our place, or we unlock every door in this house and let what we've become spread to the world. The choice is yours." I looked at my pocket watch. 9:47 p.m. Just over 2 hours to make an impossible decision. 2 hours to decide the fate of not just myself, but possibly all of humanity. And somewhere in the walls, that scratching sound grew louder, as if something vast and terrible was trying to claw its way into our reality. Time moves differently when you're facing the impossible. Those 2 hours felt like days and seconds simultaneously. I found myself pacing the room, my footsteps echoing in patterns that didn't match my movements, as if the house itself was beginning to duplicate my actions. "Tell me about the ritual," I demanded, trying to maintain some facade of rational thought. "If I'm to make this choice, I need to understand what you're asking of me." The family members, all their versions, exchanged looks that seemed to communicate across their multiple forms. It was Samuel who answered, his eyeless face turning toward me with unnerving precision. "Grandfather's journal," he said. "It's all in there. Father, show him." Jeremiah hesitated, then reached into a drawer beside Constance's bed. His hand passed through 3 different positions simultaneously, one reaching, one grasping, one already holding the book, before solidifying into a single action. The leather-bound journal he produced was ancient, its pages yellowed and brittle. "Thaddeus Crowhurst," Jeremiah said, handling the journal like it might bite him. "He knew what this land was when he built here. The Creek Indians called it the breathing ground, a place where the fabric between worlds was thin, where reality exhaled and inhaled like a living thing." I took the journal with trembling hands and began to read. The entries started normally enough: accounts of construction, difficulties with workers who kept fleeing the site, strange dreams. But as the dates progressed, the writing became increasingly frantic. October 15th, 1789. The foundation is complete, but the workers report seeing their own faces in the stones. Impossible, yet 3 men have quit after swearing they saw themselves already working, already dead, already born. November 2nd, 1789. I found it. The source. A natural cave beneath the property, but natural is the wrong word. The walls pulse like living tissue, and the air inside exists in multiple states. Sometimes breathable, sometimes water, sometimes solid stone. All at once. December 1st, 1789. The locks are being installed. Iron forged with salt and blood, my blood. Every door must be controllable from the outside. It's the only way to contain what I've awakened. The house isn't a home. It's a prison, and we are both the prisoners and the guards. I looked up from the journal. He knew. Your grandfather knew what he was building. He thought he could control it, Constance said, her 12 forms speaking in a round, each picking up where the last left off. Use it. The space between spaces contains infinite possibilities, infinite wealth, infinite power, infinite life. But infinity has a price, the twins added. I continued reading, skipping ahead to the final entries. March 19th, 1790. The ritual is prepared. One soul to hold the door. One consciousness to maintain the boundary. I've chosen our strongest slave, Marcus. He volunteered, or so I tell myself. Tonight we seal the passage. March 20th, 1790. It failed. Marcus wasn't willing, not truly. The door remains open, seeping into our bloodline like poison. I can feel it in my children already. They laugh at nothing, speak to empty rooms, exist in moments that haven't happened yet. We're cursed. Every generation will carry this taint, growing stronger until finally... The entry ended there, the rest of the page torn away. Until finally we became the door ourselves. Margaret finished, her 7 forms circling me slowly. Each generation, the multiplication grew stronger. Our parents could sometimes appear in 2 places. We can appear in dozens. Our children. She trailed off, but the implication was clear. Your children would exist everywhere at once, I said, understanding dawning like a terrible sunrise. They would be omnipresent. Gods or demons or something beyond human comprehension. Unless the ritual is completed properly, Samuel said, with a willing sacrifice. Someone who chooses to take the burden, to become the singular point that holds all possibilities in check. I set the journal down, my hands shaking. And if I refuse? As if in answer, the house began to change. The walls started breathing, literally breathing, expanding and contracting like lungs. The floorboards rippled like water. And through it all, that scratching sound grew louder, more insistent. I'll show you, Samuel said, and reached out to touch my hand. The moment his skin made contact with mine, I saw everything. I saw Willow Creek overrun with multiplying people, each person becoming dozens, then hundreds of versions of themselves. I saw the multiplication spreading like a plague across Alabama, across America, across the world. I saw humanity cease to exist as individual beings and become a writhing mass of possibilities, all existing simultaneously, all going mad from the infinite perspectives. I saw the end of linear time, the end of singular existence, the end of everything that makes us human. But I also saw something else. In the vision, I saw myself accepting the ritual, taking the Crowhurst's place. I saw myself standing in the cellar, my body becoming a living seal on the door between worlds. I saw myself aging, dying, but never able to truly die, held in place by the ritual's power. An eternal guardian, alone and forgotten. Samuel released my hand, and I gasped, falling to my knees. Those are the choices, he said simply. You become the door, or the door opens fully. I looked at my watch. 10:43 p.m. Time was running out, and with each passing moment, I could see more duplicates appearing. The room was becoming crowded with versions of the Crowhurst family, each slightly different, each equally real. There has to be another way, I insisted. Medicine, science, logic. There has to be a solution that doesn't require human sacrifice. Constance laughed, and the sound came from so many throats it was like a choir of madness. Oh, doctor, still clinging to your rational world. Haven't you realized yet? We're beyond medicine. We're beyond science. We're in the realm of things that shouldn't be but are. As she spoke, I noticed something. The chemical smell from my broken vials was still in the air, and where it was strongest, the duplicates seemed fewer, less solid. An idea began to form, desperate, probably insane, but an idea nonetheless. The chloroform, I said suddenly. It affects you, limits you. Jeremiah's eyes widened. What are you thinking? Chemistry, I said, my mind racing. If certain chemicals can inhibit the multiplication, perhaps the right combination could reverse it. Force you back into singular forms. Impossible, the twins said, but I heard uncertainty in their synchronized voices. Is it? I challenged. Your grandfather used iron and salt and blood to create locks. Physical materials to contain metaphysical phenomena. Why couldn't other materials have similar effects? I grabbed my medical bag, inventory racing through my mind. Chloroform, ether, laudanum, mercury compounds, various tinctures and extracts. I had no idea what I was doing, but I had to try something, anything, other than the 2 impossible choices they'd given me. You're wasting time, Samuel said, his voice sad. The moon sets at 11:47. When darkness is complete, we won't be able to hold ourselves together anymore. The doors will unlock themselves. I ignored him, mixing compounds with the reckless abandon of a madman or a genius. I still don't know which. The family watched, their multiple forms flickering between hope and resignation. As I worked, I became aware of a new sound joining the scratching in the walls. Whispers. Hundreds of voices speaking in languages that predated human speech. The thing behind the door in the cellar was growing stronger, feeding on the family's deteriorating control. Doctor, Jeremiah said urgently, whatever you're going to try, do it now. I can feel myself spreading. I can see through eyes in rooms I've never entered, in times I've never lived. I'm losing myself in the multiplication. I held up the vial I'd been preparing. A mixture that should have been poisonous, should have been impossible, but in this house where impossible things were commonplace might just work. Everyone drink, I commanded. Every version of you, all at once. They hesitated, and in that moment of hesitation, I heard it clearly. The sound of a lock turning somewhere deep in the house. Then another, and another. The doors were beginning to open. The first lock that gave way was in the cellar. We heard it clearly. A metallic shriek followed by the sound of ancient wood splintering. The house shuddered as if in pain, and suddenly the multiplication accelerated. Where Margaret had 7 versions, now there were 12, then 20. The twins split into armies of themselves. Constance's forms filled the room like a kaleidoscope of suffering. Drink, I shouted, shoving the vial toward them. All of you now? But how do you give medicine to someone who exists in multiple states? Each version of Constance reached for the vial, their hands passing through each other like ghosts. The liquid seemed to exist in multiple states too. Full, empty, spilling, contained, all simultaneously. It won't work, Samuel said. His eyeless face turned toward the floor. I can see the outcome. Every possibility leads to the same ending. Then we changed the possibilities. I grabbed the boy by his shoulders. You're the anchor, you said, the one keeping them tethered. What if we reversed it? What if instead of them spreading out from you, we pulled them back through you? Another lock broke, this one closer, perhaps on the second floor. The scratching in the walls became a roar, and I could see shapes moving behind the wallpaper, pressing against the boundaries of our reality. Samuel tilted his head, considering. That would destroy me. Or transform you, I said urgently. Your family isn't dying, they're evolving, just in the wrong direction. What if we could guide that evolution? The doctor speaks of things he doesn't understand. Constance hissed, but her voices were less synchronized now, some speaking faster, some slower, as if the multiplication was causing them to drift apart. I turned to Jeremiah. The journal, your grandfather mentioned Marcus wasn't willing. But what if the ritual doesn't require a sacrifice? What if it requires a catalyst? Someone to channel the transformation, not stop it. Hope flickered in his multitude of eyes. You mean? I mean we don't fight this. We complete it. But we complete it properly. I grabbed every remaining chemical from my bag, mixing them not with any scientific method but with pure instinct. The concoction glowed, actually glowed, with a light that hurt to perceive, existing in spectrums beyond human vision. Everyone, form a circle, I commanded. Every version of you, create a boundary. They obeyed, perhaps out of desperation, perhaps out of hope. The dozens of duplicates arranged themselves in concentric circles with Samuel at the center and me beside him. The moment the circle closed, the temperature dropped 20 degrees. Frost spread across the windows, but it was frost that moved, that lived, that watched. Now, I said, pouring the glowing mixture onto the floor in the center of our circle. Samuel, I need you to do something that might seem impossible. I need you to see not all possibilities, but one. Just one. The possibility where your family survives this intact. I can't, he whimpered. There are infinite variations, infinite outcomes. Then choose one, I shouted as another lock shattered. This one in the room next door. You're the anchor, so anchor them. The mixture on the floor began to smoke, and the smoke didn't rise. It spread out in tendrils that connected each family member to their duplicates, creating a web of vapor that pulsed with its own heartbeat. That's when the door to the bedroom exploded inward. What entered wasn't a creature. It was an absence. A hole in reality shaped vaguely like a person, but a person that had been turned inside out across dimensions. It was the space between spaces given form, and looking at it was like staring into madness itself. Too late, it said in a voice that came from everywhere and nowhere. The door is open. The breathing ground exhales. But Samuel stepped forward, his small hand reaching out to touch the thing that shouldn't exist. No, he said simply. I see a different possibility. What happened next defied every law of physics, medicine, and sanity I'd ever known. Samuel began to glow, not with light, but with possibility itself. He became a prism through which all the duplicate versions of his family were refracted. I watched as Margaret's 20 forms began to converge, pulled toward her brother like light bending toward a black hole. The thing from between spaces roared, reaching out with appendages that existed in too many dimensions. But the chemical smoke I'd created formed a barrier, and where it touched the creature, it solidified, forcing it to exist in only one state, vulnerable. "The journal!" I shouted to Jeremiah. "There must be words, an incantation, something your grandfather used." Jeremiah, all versions of him, began to speak in unison, words in a language that predated human civilization. But as he spoke, his duplicates merged, each recitation pulling him more into a singular form. The house was screaming now. Every board, every nail, every atom of the structure cried out as reality reasserted itself. The multiplications were reversing, but the process was violent, traumatic. Constance convulsed as her 12 forms slammed back together. The twins collapsed as their synchronized selves merged into 2 distinct boys. And Samuel was burning, not with fire, but with the sheer effort of holding his family together, of being the focal point through which they were returning to singular existence. The thing from between spaces lashed out, and one of its impossible appendages struck me, sending me flying into the wall. The impact should have killed me, but in this house where the rules were broken, I merely felt myself begin to fracture. I could see myself from multiple angles, lying broken on the floor, standing and fighting, fleeing in terror all simultaneously. "No," I gasped, fighting against the multiplication. "I choose to remain myself." The glowing mixture on the floor pulsed brighter, and I felt the chemical smoke enter my lungs, burning away the duplicates before they could fully form. I remained singular, but the effort left me gasping. Samuel was fading now, his small form becoming translucent. "I can see it," he whispered. "The one possibility where we all survive. But the price." "What price?" his father asked, now fully singular, tears streaming down his face. "Memory," Samuel said. "We have to forget. All of it. The house, the curse, what we've become. We have to become new people with new names, new lives. The Crowhurst family has to die for us to live." "Then let it die," Constance said, her voice hoarse but human again. "Let us all die and be reborn." The entity from between spaces shrieked its rage, but it was already being pulled back through the door it had emerged from. The chemical formula I'd created wasn't just reversing the multiplication, it was sealing the breach in reality itself. Samuel looked at me one last time with eyes that suddenly existed, brown eyes, a child's eyes, full of tears and wisdom beyond his years. "You have to be the one who remembers, Doctor. Someone has to know what happened here. Someone has to make sure it never happens again." Before I could respond, he pressed his hands together and spoke a single word in that ancient language. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Every window in the house exploded outward. The walls cracked and bled a substance that wasn't blood but might have been the house's attempt at it. The entity was sucked back into the cellar with a sound like the world ending in reverse. And the Crowhurst family, they simply ceased. Not died. Ceased. One moment they were there, the next they weren't. But even as they vanished, I saw something else appear. 5 bodies lying unconscious on the floor. They looked like the Crowhursts but different. Younger, somehow cleaner, as if they'd been washed of not just the curse but of their entire existence up to that point. The house gave one final shudder, and then everything went silent. The scratching stopped. The impossible angles straightened. The multiple states collapsed into boring, blessed singularity. I sat there in the darkness, for all the candles had been extinguished, breathing heavily, trying to process what had happened. When I finally managed to light a match, I saw that the locks on all the doors had rusted and fallen away, as if aged 100 years in an instant. The family began to stir. The man who had been Jeremiah opened his eyes, looked at me in confusion. "I'm sorry, sir," Who are you? Where are we? They had no memory, not just of the night's events, but of anything. They were blank slates, new people wearing the Crowhurst's faces. I told them there had been an accident, a gas leak that had caused hallucinations and memory loss. I gave them new names from my patient records, the Weatherbys, a family that had died of scarlet fever the year before. Told them they were from Georgia, come to Alabama to start fresh. They believed me. Why wouldn't they? The alternative was impossible. I stayed in Willow Creek for another 3 days, helping the family that had been the Crowhursts adjust to their new existence. I found documents in Jeremiah's study, deeds, bank records, correspondence. I destroyed anything that mentioned their true names and forged new papers. In those days, before photographs and modern record-keeping, it was easier than you might think to make people disappear and reappear as someone else. The children adapted quickly, as children do. Margaret, now Mary Weatherby, seemed bright and cheerful, with no trace of the multiplication that had plagued her. The twins, renamed James and John, were normal boys, mischievous but singular. Little Samuel became Simon, and his eyes remained brown and innocent, holding no memory of the cosmic horrors he'd witnessed and controlled. But the house remembered. On my second night there, I went to the cellar. I had to see the door that had started everything. The stairs groaned under my weight, and the air grew thicker with each step down. The cellar was mostly empty, just stone walls and a dirt floor, except for the far wall where a section of newer bricks stood out like a scar. Someone, Thaddeus most likely, had tried to seal it. But the bricks were cracked now, and through those cracks seeped something that wasn't quite light and wasn't quite darkness. It pulsed with the rhythm of breathing, as if the ground itself was alive. I approached carefully and peered through the largest crack. What I saw there, I cannot fully describe. It was a passage, yes, but not one that led anywhere in our three-dimensional world. It twisted and folded in on itself, existing in directions that human minds weren't meant to perceive. And deep within that impossible space, I could see things moving. Not creatures, concepts, ideas given form, possibilities that had never been born into reality, writhing and reaching toward our world like starving children pressing against glass. I understood then why the Crowhursts had multiplied. They hadn't been infected or cursed. They'd been colonized. Those unborn possibilities had found hosts in them, using their bodies and minds to manifest in our reality. Each duplicate had been another possibility forcing its way into existence. I found bags of cement in the toolshed and spent the entire night reinforcing the brick wall, adding layer after layer until the breathing light could no longer be seen. But I knew it was a temporary solution. The door was still there, still open on some fundamental level. The seal Samuel had created with his sacrifice had closed it partially, but not completely. It was like trying to dam a river with stones. Eventually, the water would find a way through. On the third day, as I prepared to leave Mrs. Weatherby, I forced myself to think of her by her new name. Approached me. "Doctor, I've been having the strangest dreams," she said. "Dreams of being in multiple places at once. Of having different lives, different faces. Is that normal?" After a gas leak, my blood ran cold, but I kept my expression neutral. "Perfectly normal," I lied. "The mind plays tricks after trauma. The dreams will fade." But would they? Or was the multiplication so deeply embedded in their bloodline that even erasing their memories couldn't remove it entirely? I left Willow Creek that afternoon, but not before making one final stop. The local church had a small library, and in it I found what I was looking for: records of the land before Thaddeus Crowhurst built his mansion. The Creek Indians had indeed called it the breathing ground, but the full translation was more specific: the place where the many become one and the one becomes many. There were stories, passed down through oral tradition and transcribed by missionaries. Stories of warriors who could be in multiple places during battle. Of medicine men who could split themselves to heal entire villages simultaneously. Of a great chief who had sacrificed himself to seal the breathing ground, to stop his people from losing themselves to the multiplication. But the seal had been broken when Thaddeus built his house. And now, despite our efforts, it was only partially repaired. I kept tabs on the Weatherby family over the years. They prospered, remarkably. Moved to Mobile, started a shipping business. The children grew up, married, had children of their own. Normal lives, by all appearances. But occasionally I would receive reports that concerned me. Mary Weatherby's husband swore he saw her in 2 places at once. The twins' business partners complained that they sometimes seemed to know things before they happened. And Simon never married, claiming he could see too many possible futures with any potential bride, and couldn't choose just one. The multiplication was still there, dormant but not dead, passed down through their blood like a sleeping virus waiting for the right conditions to reawaken. I returned to Willow Creek 20 years later in 1864. The Civil War had ravaged Alabama, and the town was all but abandoned. The Crowhurst mansion still stood, but barely. The roof had partially collapsed, and vines had consumed the white columns. I entered through a broken window, my medical bag in hand, though now it contained very different supplies. The cellar wall I'd reinforced was still standing, but the cement showed new cracks. The breathing had resumed, stronger than before, and carved into the bricks, in handwriting I didn't recognize, were the words, "They dream of us. We dream of them. Soon, the dreams will meet." I spent another night there, applying new sealants, mixing chemicals into the mortar that I'd learned could inhibit dimensional breaches. It was a losing battle, I knew. The door wanted to be open. The possibilities wanted to be born. And somewhere, the descendants of the Crowhurst family carried the potential for multiplication in their veins. As I worked, I heard footsteps upstairs. Slow, measured, walking through the ruined rooms. I called out, but received no answer. When I finally gathered the courage to investigate, I found only footprints in the dust. Footprints that started in the middle of rooms, went in impossible directions, and sometimes appeared to be walking on the walls and ceiling. The house was practicing, preparing, waiting for the right moment, the right generation, when the descendants would return and the multiplication would begin again. I left as the sun rose, and I've never been back. But I know with the certainty of a man who has seen the impossible, that the Crowhurst curse isn't ended. It's only sleeping, and sometimes, in my darkest nightmares, I see them all again. Not the Crowhursts as they were, but as they could be. Infinite versions spreading across the world like a plague of possibilities. Each person becoming dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of themselves, until humanity drowns in its own multiplicity. The door is still there. The seal is weakening. And somewhere, the great-great-grandchildren of the Crowhurst family are beginning to have strange dreams of being in multiple places at once. God help us all when they remember what they really are. I am 93 years old as I write this final account, my hands shaking not from age but from what I've recently learned. It's 1884 now, 40 years since that night in the Crowhurst mansion, and I had hoped to take this secret to my grave. But yesterday, I received a letter that changes everything. A letter that forces me to break my silence and warn whoever might listen. The letter came from Mobile, from a young doctor named Theodore Weatherby, Simon's son. The boy who had been Samuel, the anchor who saved his family, had eventually married despite his fears and had 3 children. Theodore, the eldest, had followed in my footsteps and become a physician. His letter was professional at first, asking my opinion on a peculiar medical case. But as I read on, my blood turned to ice. "Dr. Ashford," he wrote, "I'm treating my younger sister, Constance, yes, named after our grandmother, for what I initially believed to be hysteria. But her symptoms defy medical explanation. She claims to see herself in mirrors when she's not looking at them. Her reflection moves independently, sometimes appearing in multiple mirrors simultaneously. Last night, our housemaid swore she saw Constance in the library and the garden at the exact same moment. I found your name in some old family papers, and though I don't know your connection to us, something tells me you might understand what's happening. Constance." They had named her Constance, unknowingly calling back to the cursed bloodline they'd forgotten. I packed immediately and took the train to Mobile, my old medical bag beside me filled with the same chemicals I'd mixed 40 years ago, along with new compounds I'd researched in the decades since. During the journey, I read and reread young Theodore's letter, each word confirming my worst fears. The multiplication was returning. The seal was breaking. And this time it was stronger. I arrived at the Weatherby estate at dusk, a grand house overlooking Mobile Bay, bought with the fortune they'd built in shipping. Theodore met me at the door, and I was struck by how much he resembled his grandfather. The same strong jaw, the same intelligent eyes, but thankfully still brown, still human. "Dr. Ashford, thank you for coming. I didn't know who else to turn to. The local physicians think I'm mad." "Show me to her," I said, wasting no time on pleasantries. He led me through hallways decorated with portraits of the family. I noticed something disturbing. In several of the paintings, there seemed to be shadows of additional figures, as if the artist had painted someone and then covered them over. The multiplication was bleeding backward through time, affecting even their recorded images. Constance's room was on the 3rd floor, the windows facing west toward the setting sun. The moment I entered, I knew we were almost too late. She sat at her vanity, but her reflection showed her standing by the window. Another reflection in a hand mirror showed her lying in bed. And Constance herself, the original, if such a term even applied, was flickering between states, sometimes solid, sometimes translucent. "You're the doctor from the stories," she said without turning around. "The one Grandfather Simon dreams about. He doesn't remember you, but he dreams of you. We all do." "How long has this been happening?" I asked, setting down my bag. "Since my 18th birthday. Since I visited the old house." My heart sank. "What old house?" "The one in Willow Creek. We own it still, though we don't know why. Father says it's been in the family forever, though he can't remember buying it. I went there last month, drawn by dreams. And in the cellar." She turned to face me, and her eyes were starting to darken, brown fading to black. In the cellar, the wall was broken open, and something whispered to me. It said, "Welcome home, Constance Crowhurst." The name hit her like a physical blow. She convulsed, and suddenly there were 3 of her in the room, each one more solid than before. "Theodore," I commanded, "gather your family, everyone, parents, siblings, servants. We need to perform the ritual again, tonight before." A crash from downstairs interrupted me. Then screaming. Theodore ran to the door, but I grabbed his arm. "Don't go alone. She's not the only one changing." We descended together to find chaos. Mary Margaret was in the parlor, but she was also in the dining room, the kitchen, and the garden all simultaneously. The versions were talking to each other, planning something in voices that grew less human with each word. James and John, the twins, had split not into duplicates but into fragments. One body with 2 heads, another with 4 arms, abominations that shouldn't exist. And in the center of it all stood Simon. Samuel, the old man now, his hair white, his face lined, but his eyes had gone completely white, the inverse of what they'd been that night 40 years ago. "I remember," he said, his voice echoing from multiple throats he didn't possess. "I remember everything. The sacrifice, the forgetting, the seal. But you made a mistake, Doctor. You can't kill an idea by making people forget it. You can only delay its return." The house began to change around us. Not the Weatherby mansion, but the Crowhurst house superimposing itself over this one. I could see both simultaneously, the elegant mobile home and the decaying Alabama manor existing in the same space. "The door never closed," Samuel continued. "We are the door. We've always been the door. Every generation it opens a little wider. And now, with Constance breaking the physical seal, with us remembering who we are, it's opening fully." I reached into my bag, pulling out the chemicals I'd prepared, but Samuel laughed. "Those won't work anymore. We've evolved past your crude chemistry. We exist in more dimensions than your compounds can reach." He was right. I could see it. The family wasn't just multiplying in our 3-dimensional space anymore. They were spreading into dimensions I couldn't fully perceive, becoming things that human language had no words for. "Then what do you want?" I asked desperately. "To complete what was started," all the versions of Constance said in unison. "To open the door fully and let the breathing ground exhale completely. To make the world like us, infinite, impossible, free from the prison of singular existence." That's not freedom, I argued. That's madness. Humanity can't survive that kind of transformation. Then humanity will evolve or perish, Samuel said simply. Just as we did. I looked around at the nightmare the family had become. Mary had split into so many versions I couldn't count them all. The twins were continuously merging and dividing like some horrible mitosis. Theodore stood frozen in horror, watching his family transform into something beyond comprehension. But Constance was different. The youngest, the newest to the multiplication, she still had moments of singularity, moments where she pulled herself together into one form. And in those moments, I saw fear in her eyes. She didn't want this. There is another way, I said, an idea forming born of desperation. The original ritual, it didn't fail because Marcus wasn't willing. It failed because he was alone. But what if the entire family performed it together? What if you all became the seal, permanently, completely? Samuel's many forms turned to me. We would cease to exist entirely. Not death, complete erasure from reality. Yes, I said, but you would save the world, save humanity. Isn't that worth the sacrifice? The family members looked at each other across their multiple forms, conducting a conversation in glances that transcended normal communication. Finally, it was Constance who spoke, pulling herself into a single form with visible effort. I'll do it. I'll be the seal. But not alone, we all have to choose it. Truly choose it, not be forced or tricked. That's the only way it will hold permanently. One by one, the family members began to nod. Even in their multiplied, monstrous states, something human remained. Love for each other. Love for the world they were about to destroy. The same love that had made them lock their doors from the outside 40 years ago. Tell us what to do, Samuel said, his voice heavy with resignation. I pulled out Thaddeus's journal. I'd kept it all these years. Form a circle, all of you, every version. Theodore, you stand in the center, you're still singular, still human. You'll be the anchor for the ritual, the point through which they return to nothing. As they arranged themselves, the house continued to shift between realities. I could hear things moving in the walls, not just scratching now, but laughing, crying, singing in languages that had never existed. The breathing ground was fully awake, ready to exhale its impossibilities into our world. I began to read from the journal, the original words Thaddeus had written but never dared to speak. Words that predated human civilization, words that hurt to pronounce. As I spoke, the air in the room began to thicken, and I realized with horror that I was beginning to multiply too. I could see myself from multiple angles, feel myself existing in different states. The ritual was affecting everyone, not just the family. If we didn't complete it soon, everyone in Mobile, perhaps everyone in the world, would begin to split and multiply. Now, I shouted. Choose. All of you, choose to be the seal. What happened next was beautiful and terrible. Each family member, every version of them, spoke in perfect unison. We choose to hold the door closed. We choose to be the boundary. We choose to cease so that others may continue. The effect was immediate. They began to fold in on themselves, each duplicate collapsing into the next like a house of cards falling in reverse. But as they collapsed, they didn't return to singular forms. They continued to condense, becoming smaller, denser, until they were points of impossible brightness. Constance was the last to go. She looked at me with eyes that had returned to their natural brown and smiled. Tell them we existed. Tell them we chose correctly. Then she too collapsed, and the 5 points of light that had been the Crowhurst family merged into a single star that hung in the air for a moment before shooting downward, through the floor, through the earth, back to the breathing ground beneath the old house. The room snapped back to normal. The Weatherby mansion was just a house again. The impossible angles straightened. The multiplying stopped. And standing in the center of the room was Theodore, alone, weeping for a family he'd just lost and barely remembered. The seal was complete, perfect, permanent. But the cost? I stayed with Theodore for a week, helping him understand what had happened, what his family had sacrificed. He kept asking me why he had been spared, why he alone remained singular throughout the ordeal. Because someone has to remember, I told him. Someone has to know the truth and guard against anyone trying to open that door again. Your family is the seal now, but seals can be broken if people forget why they were placed. Theodore took up that burden. He moved back to Willow Creek, not to the mansion that collapsed the night his family became the seal, but to a small house nearby. He became the guardian of the breathing ground, ensuring no one built on that land. No one dug too deep. No one awakened what slept below. He married, had children, and passed the responsibility to them. They still guard it today, 40 years later, though they've changed their name again to avoid questions. They're the Blackwood family now, and they maintain the fiction that they're caretakers for a historical site. But they know the truth. They know what's buried there. They know what their ancestors became to save the world. And now, as I prepare to die, I pass this account to you, whoever you are, reading this. Know that the door between worlds exists. Know that it wants to open, that the impossibilities beyond it want to be born into our reality. Know that the Crowhurst family holds it closed with their very existence, transformed into an eternal seal. And if you ever find yourself in Alabama, near a town that used to be called Willow Creek, and you see a patch of ground where nothing grows, where the earth seems to breathe, where reality feels thin, leave. Leave immediately. Don't listen to the whispers that promise you could be more than you are, that you could exist in all places at all times. Because the door is still there. The seal holds for now, but seals can be broken, and some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed. Remember the Crowhursts. Remember their sacrifice, and pray that their seal holds for all eternity. Because if it doesn't, if it ever breaks completely, we will all discover what it means to exist everywhere and nowhere, to be everything and nothing, to live in the spaces between spaces where humanity was never meant to dwell. This is my testimony. This is my warning. This is the truth about the Crowhurst family, who locked their doors from the outside by themselves, and in doing so saved us all. Dr. Elijah Ashford, 1884. Samuel's many forms turned to me. We would cease to exist entirely. Not death. Complete erasure from reality. Yes, I said, but you would save the world. Save humanity. Isn't that worth the sacrifice? The family members looked at each other across their multiple forms, conducting a conversation in glances that transcended normal communication. Finally, it was Constance who spoke, pulling herself into a single form with visible effort. I'll do it. I'll be the seal. But not alone, we all have to choose it. Truly choose it, not be forced or tricked. That's the only way it will hold permanently. One by one, the family members began to nod. Even in their multiplied, monstrous states, something human remained. Love for each other. Love for the world they were about to destroy. The same love that had made them lock their doors from the outside 40 years ago. Tell us what to do, Samuel said, his voice heavy with resignation. I pulled out Thaddeus's journal. I'd kept it all these years. Form a circle, all of you, every version. Theodore, you stand in the center, you're still singular, still human. You'll be the anchor for the ritual, the point through which they return to nothing. As they arranged themselves, the house continued to shift between realities. I could hear things moving in the walls. Not just scratching now, but laughing, crying, singing in languages that had never existed. The breathing ground was fully awake, ready to exhale its impossibilities into our world. I began to read from the journal, the original words Thaddeus had written but never dared to speak. Words that predated human civilization, words that hurt to pronounce. As I spoke, the air in the room began to thicken, and I realized with horror that I was beginning to multiply too. I could see myself from multiple angles, feel myself existing in different states. The ritual was affecting everyone, not just the family. If we didn't complete it soon, everyone in Mobile, perhaps everyone in the world, would begin to split and multiply. Now, I shouted. Choose. All of you, choose to be the seal. What happened next was beautiful and terrible. Each family member, every version of them, spoke in perfect unison. We choose to hold the door closed. We choose to be the boundary. We choose to cease so that others may continue. The effect was immediate. They began to fold in on themselves, each duplicate collapsing into the next like a house of cards falling in reverse. But as they collapsed, they didn't return to singular forms. They continued to condense, becoming smaller, denser, until they were points of impossible brightness. Constance was the last to go. She looked at me with eyes that had returned to their natural brown and smiled. "Tell them we existed. Tell them we chose correctly." Then she too collapsed, and the 5 points of light that had been the Crowhurst family merged into a single star that hung in the air for a moment before shooting downward, through the floor, through the earth, back to the breathing ground beneath the old house. The room snapped back to normal. The Weatherby mansion was just a house again. The impossible angles straightened. The multiplying stopped. And standing in the center of the room was Theodore, alone, weeping for a family he'd just lost and barely remembered. The seal was complete, perfect, permanent. But the cost? I stayed with Theodore for a week, helping him understand what had happened, what his family had sacrificed. He kept asking me why he had been spared, why he alone remained singular throughout the ordeal. "Because someone has to remember," I told him. "Someone has to know the truth and guard against anyone trying to open that door again. Your family is the seal now, but seals can be broken if people forget why they were placed." Theodore took up that burden. He moved back to Willow Creek, not to the mansion that collapsed the night his family became the seal, but to a small house nearby. He became the guardian of the breathing ground, ensuring no one built on that land. No one dug too deep. No one awakened what slept below. He married, had children, and passed the responsibility to them. They still guard it today, 40 years later, though they've changed their name again to avoid questions. They're the Blackwood family now, and they maintain the fiction that they're caretakers for a historical site. But they know the truth. They know what's buried there. They know what their ancestors became to save the world. And now, as I prepare to die, I pass this account to you, whoever you are, reading this. Know that the door between worlds exists. Know that it wants to open, that the impossibilities beyond it want to be born into our reality. Know that the Crowhurst family holds it closed with their very existence, transformed into an eternal seal. And if you ever find yourself in Alabama, near a town that used to be called Willow Creek, and you see a patch of ground where nothing grows, where the earth seems to breathe, where reality feels thin, leave. Leave immediately. Don't listen to the whispers that promise you could be more than you are, that you could exist in all places at all times. Because the door is still there. The seal holds for now, but seals can be broken. And some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed. Remember the Crowhursts. Remember their sacrifice. And pray that their seal holds for all eternity. Because if it doesn't, if it ever breaks completely, we will all discover what it means to exist everywhere and nowhere, to be everything and nothing, to live in the spaces between spaces where humanity was never meant to dwell. This is my testimony. This is my warning. This is the truth about the Crowhurst family, who locked their doors from the outside by themselves, and in doing so saved us all. Dr. Elijah Ashford, 1884.